All right. So I see that we have a few people coming in. It's already been a few minutes. Let's get this first webinar from YCPA started. So, bienvenue à tous et merci pour votre participation au tout premier webinaire. Je me présente Cindy Ho, présidente de l'Association des jeunes professionnels chinois et asiatiques et aussi associée chez DS Avocats. J'espère que vous allez bien et que nous allons être en mesure de répondre à vos questions aujourd'hui. Ce webinaire déroulera en anglais, mais n'hésitez pas à communiquer avec nous en français ou même en chinois. Mon chinois et celui de Brenden laisse un peu à désirer, mais par contre, je suis certaine qu'on aura des petits aides avec des traducteurs qui seront là avec nous. So welcome everyone, and thank you for participating at this webinar organized by the Young Chinese Professional Association. My name is Cindy Ho, and I'm the president of YCPA and partner at DS Lawyers Canada LLP. I hope you're doing well, and as mentioned on our social media newsletter, YCPA thrives to continue to support its members and community, especially during these challenging times in COVID. Tonight's webinar is part of YCPA's leadership series and will focus on public speaking and online presentations, which is two key aspects that are required in our lives, especially today. So whether it comes to presenting a new project to upper management or the results of your work to your teammates, this webinar will hopefully be able to provide you with some insights. During this webinar, our speaker, Brenden Ksmy, I'm sorry, Brenden, again, A+ hopefully for effort, will provide you with the basic guidelines on how to master public speaking and give us tips for online presentation, which will allow us to be the best versions of ourselves and will be the reality for the upcoming months. Before we start, I will introduce a little bit about YCPA and our speaker. I will share my screen. So this is a little bit of our agenda today. So you can see before we start, I'll talk to you a little bit about YCPA and our speaker. Our vision at YCPA is threefold: to unite, to empower, and propel young Asian professionals and entrepreneurs. We foster networks, create opportunities to connect, train, and equip our members with the tools they need to exceed in their potential and become today's leaders. With a diverse pool of talent across a range of exciting fields, we mobilize individuals to break new grounds and dynamically contribute to Canada's economic and social growth. By becoming active, uniting voice for Asian community, we facilitate global partnerships to create an international business platform between Canada and Asia. As a proud member of the Recrutement des Jeunes Chambres de Commerce du Québec, the RJCCQ, we promote exciting opportunities for our members to bring new products, services, and ideas at the forefront. And in doing so, we are supported by a portfolio of prestigious public, private, and not-for-profit organizations from one side of the Pacific to the other. Also, as a community-based organization, YCPA also works hard at bringing awareness to a number of humanitarian and social causes. By recognizing the importance of giving back and promoting a collaborative community arrangement, we empower our members to build capacity through the exchange of knowledge, coupled with a series of workshops, mentoring, and conferences, such as tonight, designed to help develop effective skills and competencies. We propel our members to the next level in their career. Tonight's webinar is a perfect example of YCPA's activities in order to achieve such goals. Brenden is a founder of MasterTalk, a YouTube channel he created to help others master the art of communication and public speaking. He has helped many startups raise capital and improve their pitch decks through his time in venture capital at Front Row Ventures and enjoys mentoring purpose-driven individuals to achieve their milestones in life. He also works at IBM as an associate consultant, helping his clients navigate through HR transformations in industries like telecommunication and construction. We will begin with Brenden's presentation, and afterwards we'll have a short Q&A period. All attendees can ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and we'll gladly answer them at the Q&A period. So without further ado, please welcome Brenden. We're very grateful to have you and share your insights with us, even though it's a very nice and sunny day outside.
Thanks for having me, Sandy. It's such a pleasure to be here. Let me just share my screen. Should be good now. And perfect. Perfect. Well, I hope you're all having an amazing evening. It's so great to be here at this association to help you all with a bit on how to master communication. So before I get started, I always like to give a couple of disclaimers. The first one is that the way that I speak is not necessarily the right one. I'm someone who's very extroverted. I like taking up space in a room. I love being energetic. And just because I do that doesn't necessarily mean that I speak well. It's just my style of communication. And I'm also saying that because the vast majority of the people that I speak to lie on the other end of the spectrum. They would rather read a book than watch a presentation on presentations. They would rather do things that not involve social interaction, yet alone presenting. And my message for you is that this presentation is equally relevant for any type of speaker. A lot of the best people that I've worked with over the years, coaching people, have mostly been introverts, and they've spoken on many different stages and competitions. So keep an open mind, and I'm 100% sure you can take something away from this. Another small thing is, si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas de me demander aussi. And towards the end of the webinar, I can answer any of the questions either in English or en français, depending on what you guys prefer. All right, let's get started. Much like every first generation immigrant, our goal is very simple. Get a great job, get a great university so that we can provide a better opportunity for the families that brought us here. And I'm no exception to this rule. I studied really hard. I got the best grades in school, whether it was in mathematics, sciences, or really anything. But when it came to public speaking, this is a more accurate representation of who I was. So the question is, why? Why is someone like me, who's very extroverted, who loves to have all this energy, why was I so scared of public speaking? Well, when I was 5 years old, growing up in Montreal, my parents looked at me and they said, well, Brenden, if you want to be successful in this city, you need to know how to speak French. Except one problem. I didn't know how to speak French. In fact, I didn't even know a single word. Yet for the first 15 years of my life, I studied in a French curriculum. So not only was I uncomfortable with presentations, I had to give presentations in a language I didn't even know. So when I was in 4th grade or 5th grade, I would walk up to the room and go, bonjour, and that would be my presentation. And this story has a simple message to it. And that message is, besides the look that I had when I learned that I had to study in French my whole life, is that public speaking works a lot in the same way that we learn leadership. We know that leaders are not born, but rather created over a series of experiences in our lives. But we seem to believe that public speaking is something you're born with. Oh, I'm not a speaker. This isn't for me. And I'm here to break that norm. Because if there's anything that I want you to take away from this entire workshop, it's the following point. Public speaking, I fundamentally believe, is a learned skill. Because I guarantee you, I wasn't born with it. So if I could do it, I'm sure you can too. And that's why I also started my YouTube channel to help the world master the art of public speaking. Hi everyone, my name is Brenden Ksmy. I'm the founder of MasterTalk, a YouTube channel I started with to help the world overcome their fear of public speaking and master the art of communication. And today we're going to be covering my 5 public speaking tips for you to master. Okay, I work at IBM. Okay, let's move on. All right, so let's start with the first tip, silences. Think about your favorite speaker. Whether it's Sir Ken Robinson's on how schools could do a better job at instilling creativity in their curriculums, to Angela Duckworth's on the importance and power of grit, all of our favorite speakers share one thing in common. And that commonality is their ability to pause at specific parts of a presentation, to bring emphasis on the parts of their message that matters. But instead of just taking my word for it and leaving it theoretical, let's use an example to demonstrate this. In this slide that I call the moving forward slide, that I used to present in competitions in university, what I'm going to do with this slide is I'm going to present it with silences and without them so that we can see the difference, and I can hopefully convince you that silences are important. So let's go with version 1. Version 1 sounds like this. Amit Kalandri, author of the book Run Machine, once said that if you fulfill the wishes of your employees, they in turn will fulfill your vision. But what is your vision at Vitality Health? Your vision is to keep A players like Michael within the business, accelerate company growth so that one day you can become a world leader in nutritional services. But what's stopping you from achieving this vision today? Conflicts between your employees will persist if you don't remove the stack ranking system within Vitality Health. This will lead to disengaged employees and no innovations in the company, which means a high turnover rate and a large financial impact for the business. But as long as you never forget that every single one of your employees is a star, we believe at Flow Consulting Group that you'll always be successful. That's why we're proud and excited today to present a star recommendation, structuring HR policies, training and communicating to all of your stakeholders, assessing for success, and retaining to progress. We believe that if you treat every single one of your employees like a star, you'll always be successful. And the same smile that Michael had on his face on the first day he started the company will remain until his last. So normally, if this was an in-person presentation, I always like to ask the crowd, out of 10, how was that? And I get two types of audiences. One is usually really nice with me. They say, "Oh, Brenden, that was good. 7, better than what I can do, sure." And then I get audiences that are a bit more honest with me. I gave a keynote a couple of months ago to a bunch of teenagers for an organization called Technovation. And I got in there. I was like the expert communicator panelist, which to a 16-year-old means some dude in a suit. So I wake up Sunday morning. It's 8 a.m. I'm in a room with a bunch of teenagers. Clearly, they weren't very excited to listen to me, yet alone hear about communication. So when I asked them this question, what do you girls think? Do you think this is good or not? I got dead silence. Nobody said anything. And then there was this one girl all the way in the back named Julia who raises her hand. I go, finally, I get some participation. So I asked Julia, what'd you think? And she looks at me dead in the eye and says, 5. And I go, great. Professional speech coach gets slapped in the face by a 16-year-old in the morning on a Sunday. That's awesome. So I asked her, I said, Julia, why do you think I got a 5 out of 10 there? And she looked at me really honestly and said, well, you're too fast and nobody understands what you're saying. And like, what the heck is even going on? And Julia was absolutely right. I was too fast. No one understood what I was saying. And really, what the heck was going on? But I asked Julia the same thing that I'll ask you. And that question is, what if I presented the exact same thing, the exact same content, but with silences? What would the difference sound like? Well, everyone, it would sound something like this. Amit Kalandri, author of the book Run Machine, once said that if you fulfill the wishes of your employees, they in turn will fulfill your vision. But what is your vision at Vitality Health? Your vision is to keep A players within the business, accelerate company growth so that one day you can become a world leader in nutritional services. But what's stopping you from achieving this vision today? Conflicts between your employees will persist if you don't remove the stack ranking system within Vitality. This will lead to disengaged employees and ultimately no innovation within the business, which means a large financial impact for Vitality. And employees like Michael that we cherished for years upon years will leave us. But as long as you never forget that every single one of your employees is a star, we believe at Flow Consulting Group that you'll always be successful. And that's why we're proud and excited to present our star recommendation, structuring your HR policies, training and communicating to all your stakeholders, assessing for success, and retaining to progress. We believe that if you treat every single one of your employees like a star, the same smile that Michael had on his face when he started at Vitality Health will stay until his last. Much better, right? But the better question that we need to ask ourselves is why? Why, oh, why do we sound better with silences? But more importantly, why don't we use them? We see all of these great speakers. Angela Duckworth, Sir Ken Robinson, I showed you right now. But why aren't we implementing silences? We know they're important. So why aren't we using them? And I've pondered this question for many years. And I believe the answer to this question lies in the classroom. I mean, think about it. Most of the presentations that we give are not optional, but rather forced. I don't wake up one morning and say, hey, Cindy, you want to get breakfast and then present all day? Nobody says that because it doesn't really make sense. A more accurate representation of this is we're in high school and our teacher comes up to us and says, Brenden, I need you to do a presentation on the Renaissance. And you're kind of looking at her confused. Like, what's a Renaissance? Is some sort of fruit? But, you kind of figure it out. You put your thoughts together and you realize after a couple of hours searching Wikipedia that the Renaissance is actually a time period in history. And every other person in the classroom is going to present a specific topic. So you get to work, come up with some great ideas. You try and impress the classroom. You want to do well for your parents. You want to get the best grades in school. And then you work really hard. You get in front of the classroom and you present to a buzzkill of an audience. I mean, it's not their fault. They're a bunch of 16-year-olds too, who don't really care about history. No offense to history majors in the webinar. But the conclusion is very simple here. Because whenever we pause, we start to panic. Oh, I wonder what is everyone going to think of me? And obviously, if your audience is looking at you like this, it's not helping. So whenever you pause, your general belief system is, I feel stupid. I feel like whenever I pause, the audience is going to think ill of me. And the punchline is you don't just present in history. You present in sciences, you present in math, in English, in French, in every single class over and over again, college, university work, and you're always presenting to audiences who don't want to hear you. So, what does this mean? It means that a day-to-day speaker doesn't see silences as a good thing, but rather a bad thing. Brenden, I don't want to pause because whenever I pause, I'm not a good speaker. What will my audience think of me? They'll think I don't know what I'm talking about. But if you're an exceptional presenter, silences are a tool in your toolbox that you use to emphasize messages. Whereas when you're a day-to-day speaker, someone who's trying to learn public speaking, you don't see silences as a good thing, but rather a bad one. In other words, exceptional presenters use silences as a weapon to enhance their presentations. So what does this mean for us? How do we practice them? I've always believed that the first step to mastering silences is to first come to the realization that you sound better with them. In other words, the best way to practice silences is not actually to practice them. Let me explain what I mean here in more detail. So a good analogy I like to use is cooking, right? So when you cook for the first time, you don't really know what you're doing. You take a bunch of vegetables, you cut them up equally, you throw them in the frying pan, and then some result happens. And then as you get better as a cook in any cuisine that you prefer, you start to realize that, hey, if I cut these vegetables evenly, they're going to cook evenly. And if they cook evenly, they're going to taste better. So over a series of experiences, you start to realize with trial and error that cooking is actually a good thing and having the right technique is even a better thing. Silences work in the same way. Since our internal belief system is I don't sound better with silences, Brenden doesn't know what he's talking about. We need to flip that script. We need to flip that mindset. We need to change the way that you look at a silence. So how do we do that? I call it the forced silence drill. So the forced silence drill is very simple. You take a presentation that hopefully that you're passionate about giving, Let's say we take Cindy as this example, and she's presenting something about the YCPA. And we would have Cindy give the exact same presentation 2 times. So one as she normally would. In the second version of the presentation, the partner that's filming her would pause her at specific parts of the presentation. So now the question is, why is this exercise so effective? So let's say we use this example again. Let's say Cindy presents the first version, okay, in full, however she wants to. As the partner, let's assume I'm the partner in this case. As I watch her present, I'm going to think to myself and say, I think Cindy would actually sound better if I pause her here. I think Cindy would actually sound better if I pause her here, here, here. So the second time that she presents the exact same thing, I pause her. So let's say I did this exercise with myself and I'm doing a forced silencer and I'm talking. I'm forced to pause until the finger comes off. And when you watch both recordings, you will be shocked when you realize that the second version sounds 100 times better than the first one because somebody else artificially made you pause. So when you watch yourself on video, you say, oh, wait a minute, I actually do sound better with silences, and then you're incentivized to practice them. In the same way that when you cook and you start realizing that if you cook them evenly, the vegetables, they're going to taste better. Silences work in the exact same way. So force yourself to silence and become a master communicator. Now let's go into something a bit more advanced. This is what I like to call long pauses and stares. So I'll tell you a quick story. So me and my friend Kevin used to compete a lot at competitions across Canada for business. And we had a competition in 5 days in Windsor, Ontario, which is in the middle of nowhere. And what's great about Kevin that I love is you can give him any problem in business. It could be an acquisition, it could be a McDonald's case, any case, he will know the answer. He's like, Brenden, this is what we need to do. These are the steps we need to take. Only one problem. He didn't know how to sell it. He didn't know how to sell anything. And since we were up against 12 other universities, we needed to know how to sell our ideas, or else we can't be successful as a team. But the issue is we only had 5 days to practice. So you can imagine the stress I had. But the way that I practiced with him, because he got his silences right the first couple of times, is I started forcing him to pause for longer periods of time. So when we're doing a forced silence drill, normally you want to pause the other person for 3 seconds. So let's say I do this for myself right now, and I keep talking, right? But we needed to boost Kevin's confidence, and he was a bit overconfident. So what I did with him instead is I started pausing him for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 45 seconds, sometimes even minutes. But since I'm the only person in the audience, Kevin has to look at me the entire time. So the first couple of seconds, you could imagine him a bit cocky, a bit confident and smart. He's looking at me and he's like, yeah, this is easy. And a couple of seconds go by. He goes, and I go, Kevin, I'm the only person in the audience. Got to look at me, buddy. Then after 45 seconds, he starts to sweat a bit. After a couple of minutes, he's twitching on the floor. But the idea is, it's very simple. It's if you can pause for a very, very, very long time without making it feel awkward for your audience, your confidence as a presenter will skyrocket. Because when you go back to doing 3 or 5 second pauses in a normal presentation, you're a lot more comfortable holding the pause. And I'll tell you another secret. The best presenters in the world can pause forever without making it feel awkward at all. Well, obviously we don't have forever. We have to take my word for it. But the idea is very simple. Whenever I'm in in-person workshops, what I do is I actually stare at everyone individually for 10 seconds each. And it's just the room is just quiet for 2 minutes just to prove my point. But the idea is if you can practice pausing for an indefinite period of time, you will easily be within the top 5 to 10% of speakers in the world because most people can't do this. All right, ums and ahs. Brenden, how do we get rid of these pesky words in our vocabulary that plague our very lexicons and the words that we use in our presentations? And the way that we need to think about this is we need to enter the mindset of someone who's an average speaker versus someone who's at the elite level. And let's walk through that mindset together through these three bubbles. We're both going to forget what we want to say next. I don't have an amazing memory. I'm not Jim Quick, right? Everyone's going to forget something eventually. So naturally, we think about it and we get nervous. But the difference lies in the third bubble. Let's play this out. So let's say I'm an average speaker, right? I forget what I want to say next. So naturally, I think about it. What was I supposed to say next? And I get nervous. And then I use filler words to buy time. Oh wait, there's no slides in my wall. Yeah, so I say filler words to buy time. But if you're really good at communication, what happens is the following. We forget what we want to say next. So naturally, we get nervous and think about it. What was I supposed to say next? But the difference is we say nothing to buy time. Absolutely nothing. And for the keeners who have probably realized, which is everyone on this call, I'm sure, the first and second tip that I've given you today are exactly the same. Because exceptional presenters replace all of their ums and ahs with silences. So if you get better with silences, whether it's long pauses, long stares, and you start to use it as a tool, naturally, the number of ums and ahs that you have in a workshop, a presentation, or really anything will go down drastically. Here's a super easy analogy. You're always better off saying nothing and maintaining eye contact with your audience like so, versus saying filler words and deviating eye contact like so. What was I supposed to, you get the idea. Now what we're going to do, this is the hardest part of a presentation, then after it's pretty easy going out. Now we're going to cover the process and how I got rid of my ums and ahs. Because I'm sure you're thinking, oh, this is great in theory, Brenden. Okay, great, awesome. You got rid of your ums and ahs. So how do I get rid of them now? So I'll go through that in detail. I'll explain this one twice because it's a bit tricky. So the process is always the same for every speaker. So I'll use two different examples to demonstrate. So, well, I'll repeat the same one twice. So I've always believed that there's three types of speakers in this context. So a level 1 speaker who's trying to get better, okay, doesn't care about public speaking. This is our day-to-day speaker at work, at school, doesn't really put that much effort in, probably a guy, doesn't really do anything. A level 2 speaker is someone who says, I want to master communication. I need to get better with these ums and ahs. I need to get rid of them. And a level 3 speaker is someone who has mastered the art of silences and can weave them in their presentations. A good analogy I like to give here is the relationship we have with our parents. So when we're 10 years old and we're at a convenience store and we say, Mom, Dad, I want this chocolate bar, our parents will look at us and say, no, you're not getting a chocolate bar, right? Because they have control over us. But as we age, as we get older, and as we start to gain more experiences in our lives, and we get a job, if we want a candy bar, we can get a candy bar because we have control over our lives and over the decisions that we make. Silences work in the same way. At the beginning, when you're a level 1 speaker, silences have control over you in the same way that your parents have control over you. In some cases, they still do, but hopefully not anymore. But then as you transition to level 2 to level 3, in the same way that you age, you get experience, you get educated, you start to grow as an individual, and you start to afford whatever you want to afford. Then you start to make decisions for yourself. In the same way, as you practice silences, you start to control silences and the narrative shifts. So let's repeat that again. Level 1, someone who doesn't care about public speaking. Level 2 is someone who wants to practice. So someone on this webinar. And a level 3 is someone who has mastered it over a couple of months. It personally took me 4 months to master. I don't think it'll take that long as you, because now you have the tips. So you'll probably do it in a couple of weeks if you're serious. But I'll give you the analogies here. So let's use this sentence as an example. John loves apples. He has one every day to keep the doctor away. And we're going to assume in this sentence that the parts that are in bold, apples, to keep the doctor away, we're going to assume these are the parts of the presentation that we forget. What did John love again? Was it oranges, bananas, apples? We forget. So we need to look at the slide, as you would normally do in a presentation. And the second part is he has one every day. What was it again? Was it to keep his doctor away, his girlfriend away, his boyfriend away? I forgot, right? So, and the same time, we need to look at the slide. So I'm going to walk through this sentence with the 3 different levels that we talked about. So let's start with level 1. So level 1 is someone who doesn't care about public speaking. So it sounds something like this. John loves, what was it again? John loves apples, right? He has one every day to keep the doctor away, right? This is someone who doesn't care about public speaking. Level 2 is someone who really wants to practice and really wants to get rid of their ums and ahs. So it sounds something like this. John loves apples. He has one every day to keep the doctor away. So this is someone who's really trying to get rid of that. And that is a process you need to do intermediate between phase 2 and phase 3. So level 2 and level 3. And then after a couple of months in doing this, or in your case, a couple of weeks, then you start to really master silences, and it would sound something like this. John loves apples. He has one every day to keep the doctor away. So notice how in this example, I'm weaving silences into my pitch and into my presentation. So now the $1 million question, why do I call this exercise cutting midway? Right? Why does it have that name? And the reason it has that name is as you get better as a speaker and as you start to practice this, what starts to happen is you start to cut midway through your sentences because you want to get rid of your ums and ahs at any cost. I'll give you an example. So my presentations used to sound something like this. Good afternoon to the board of directors of IBM. My name is, I should really know this one. My name is Brenden, right? And today, so notice how I'm cutting in between my sentences because I don't have control over my silences. So this is a regular process that you'll go through. But after a couple of months, then you'll start to sound something like, good afternoon to the board of directors of IBM. My name is Brenden, and today I'm going to present you the subject. So now I'm strategically adding in the silences. And that won't take you that long. So like I was mentioning, as you get better at silences, you can weave them in more impactfully into your presentations, like I was demonstrating. And I'm sure at this point, you're probably overwhelmed. You're saying, man, silences, ums and ahs, so much content. So let me give you a little burst of confidence and courage here. A lot of people seem to believe that whenever I do my little show with Amit Kalandri and I go through my star deck, that they think it's improvised. So they would say something like, oh, Brenda, you're such a good speaker. You just kind of just walked up there. You said a quote. You had 1, 2, 3, and you did a star, and then you did all this stuff. But here's what you don't know. If there is any number that I want you to remember in this whole presentation, don't worry, this isn't a math test, but if there's one number that you need to remember, it's this number, 200. Forget this presentation. 200 represents the number of times I have presented this one slide. I have spent 6 months of my life just working on this slide. So what does that mean for you? It means that if you work on the same presentation over and over and over again, you can get just as good. You still don't believe me? I'll literally give you the blueprint to this slide. Pause for 3 seconds. Look directly into the camera. Say the Amit Kalandri quote. Oh yeah, they'll fulfill the wishes of the whatever to fulfill the whatever. Then pause. Then ask them what the vision is. What's your vision? Say the vision. Pause, sad face, 3-second pause. Look at the screen and say, what's stopping you from achieving the vision? Pain point number 1, 2.5-second pause. Pain point number 2, 2.5-second pause. You get the idea. Everything that I do in this slide is actually entirely artificial. None of it's improvised, which means if I can do it, you can too. So if there's a cause that you care about, a presentation that you do over and over and over again, my challenge to you and my ask to you is very simple. If you do the same thing 25 times, if you do the same thing 50 times, you'll see yourself present at a level you couldn't even imagine. And another thing I'll tell you, if you can just master these 2 tips, you're easily in the top 10% of all speakers. You will be shocked to see the number of senior executives I've coached in my life that can't even get these 2 tips straight. Like they sell $50 million contracts. They can't even do silences and ums and ahs. So if you could do this at the minimum, and I'm sure you can all relate to this at some level since many of you are professionals in the field, if you can just do this and you forget the rest of my presentation that I have for you, that's mostly a bonus for people who want to dive a bit deeper, you're on your way. You're already on your way to being a master communicator. So don't let this be troubling or nerve-wracking. Use this as a motivation to keep going because there's not much to actually work on. All right, let's talk about audience. This rose. I'm sure you're all wondering, why in the world does Brenden have a picture of a rose in a slide deck? And the answer is actually very simple. To prove a point. When we think about audience, the quality of your presentation lives and dies by how engaged your audience is. If I were to summarize what public speaking is in one single sentence, that sentence would be as follows. How do I convince a group of strangers to fall in love with me and my ideas? How do I convince a group of strangers to fall in love with me and my ideas? So many of the presentations that we hear on a daily basis don't break the noise. They start talking, you're like, oh, okay, and then you stop listening. Think about this presentation. It's not just a bunch of tips, right? It's stories. It's keeping in mind all the different meetings, clients, exams, schedules, and commitments that everyone in this call has. So my job as a speaker and our job as people who are presenting to others is very simple. Despite everything that the people have going on in their lives, how do I get them excited and take action on the ideas that I have for them, right? So I'm pretty sure you wonder, so why the rose? The rose is actually very simple. So when I presented to the group of 16-year-olds a couple of months ago, I asked myself, how do I get a group of teenagers to like me, right? They're teenage girls, they can't relate to me. So how do I get them excited? How do I get them interested in communication? Well, this picture is perfect because there's no teenage girl that I know of that doesn't like a rose. So I got their attention just with this image. So does this mean you need to put roses in your presentation? Absolutely not. But the point that I'm making is that great presenters think about their audience, but the greatest presenters, the best in the business, obsess about their audience. They don't just think about them, they call them, they interview them, they understand the emotions, they understand who they are. I'll give you another example. Why did I start my presentation the way I did? Why did I start my presentation with a 5-year-old kid? Why did I start my presentation with a goofy looking preschooler that has nothing to do with what I do because I'm a professional speech coach, right? So let's dive into that and think about that. This is getting a bit more advanced. It's a bonus. What I've learned over the years of doing this is it doesn't matter if I'm speaking to 10-year-old Rebecca or 55-year-old executive Tim or whoever you want to use. We all share something in common. And that commonality is our shared fear of public speaking. Whenever I talk to my audience, I always ask them, like, what are your fears? Like, what are your challenges? And they always say, I can't be you. Like, it's great that you're doing all this presentation, but I can't be you. So if I started my presentations with, look how great I am, I'm the best, how many of you would actually like me? The answer is 0, right? None of you would. You'd be like, who's this kid at IBM? Like, who cares? Right? And this is actually more emphasized if you're a 16-year-old because you don't even know how to spell IBM. You don't even know what that is, right? You're just like, or CEO, like, right? So in that way, my challenge, my ask to you is you all have amazing content. You're all smart people. But the better question to ask yourself is how do you present the same exact content in a way that people want to fall in love with you and your ideas? And that's what sets you apart. But obviously, I'm going to keep it simple with this presentation and leave you with 3 easy questions to think about. The first one is, what is the goal of the presentation? There's a very this it's a simple question, but it has a lot of nuances. If you're educating someone in this example, right, with this presentation, my goal is very different. I'm not trying to sell anything, right? It's more, oh, let's add value to the community. But what if I was trying to sell something? What if we were, but what if, like using lawyer example, what if we were trying to get a client and we were at a law firm together? The intention is very different now. The goal of our presentation is completely different. So the intention that we use as we dive into the presentation shifts. Second question, who is your audience and what are their needs and expectations? I'll give you a super concrete example to help you think about this. When I'm speaking to 10-year-old Rebecca, she's not there for public speaking tips. She's looking for confidence. She's looking for someone to tell her that she can do this. So she's like pulling my pants at the end of the workshop, and she's like, Brenden, I don't know about this public speaking thing. I'm scared. I don't. So all I need to do is not tell her how great, you got to master ums and no, no, no. I just need to go up to Rebecca and say, Rebecca, you have a beautiful smile. And if you share that smile with every crowd around you, I'm sure that everyone will think you're an amazing presenter like I do. So she gets rosy in the cheek and then starts presenting. That's super simple, right? But if I'm speaking to a 55-year-old senior executive at a law firm, Tim, he would look at me and say, okay, Brenden, okay, I got 7 minutes. I've been presenting for 30 years. I don't really have time for this presentation. So can you just like chop, give me like 2 tips and be done with it? So it's very different, right? So Rebecca is more, you're amazing. Tim, it's more, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to me. I really appreciate it. I just want to spend some time to go through some stuff. So notice how my tonality, everything completely shifts based on who I'm speaking to. So really understand your audiences at a level that almost nobody can, and you can master them at a level almost nobody will. Question number 3, okay? This is the most interesting one. How do we meet their needs in a way that gets them excited to talk about our ideas? Okay. Like I said, everyone's got great content. That's not the problem. The issue is, how do you present the exact same content in a way that gets people excited? I could have walked in this webinar and said, I got like 30 minutes. Here's my tips. And yeah, that's it. I'm done. And how many of you would actually retain the information? Or if I say something like, hey, when I was 5 years old, I struggled with communication. If I could do it, you can too. Then you start to laugh, you start to enjoy it, and then you start to actually retain the content. So in that same way, I want you to not just think about the content next time, but also think about how you can make your presentations more exciting. And I'm sure one backlash you can give me is, well, Brenden, my work-related presentations can't be as exciting as yours. I would beg to differ, right? I think there's always a way for you to spice up or add more flavors to a presentation without putting a rose in your deck, right? Like an easy way is, let's say you're giving a project update to a client, right? Like at a law firm or something, you're explaining the status quo. You can use a lot more pauses in between your objectives. You can talk about the overarching vision that you have. You can paint a better vision. So let's say, for example, we're at a law firm together. I'm trying to win a client, and I'm explaining how the RFP process is going and what's looking. I would start the presentation by saying what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve. At this law firm, we're trying to achieve X number of revenue so that we can have a more sustainable billing so that we can achieve our goal to serve clients within the Montreal area. So there's always a vision. There's always something that you can do. It's just most people don't take that extra step. So I'll challenge you to do that. All right, eye contact. Let's do a quick time check. Okay, cool. We're good on time. Eye contact is a lot more trickier than meets the eye. No pun intended. And the reason is because it varies based on 3 key elements: space, audience size, and who to prioritize. So let's use space really quickly. Presenting in my basement on a webinar is very different than presenting in a boardroom with senior executives, which is also very different than presenting at a conference. If I'm presenting in a webinar format or online, it doesn't really matter what the space is, because whenever I look directly at the lens, I look at all of you at the exact same time. So I don't need to move my head around. But if I'm in a boardroom and it's a very tight-knit environment, there's 7 to 8 people, I have 30 minutes, I want to move my head around and build relationships with everybody. And if I'm at a conference and I'm presenting to 1,000 people and I have 10 minutes, I can't move that much around because I can't look at everyone. I won't have time. Audience size. So audience size, as you can imagine, plays a big role in eye contact, because if you're presenting to 5 people and you have an hour, you can look at everyone multiple times. You can really take your time. But if you're speaking to 10,000 people, you can't do this, right? You can't get to everybody, right? There's just no time. So you have to look in one direction or something. But the third element that not many people think about is learning how to prioritize. Depending on what your goal is as a presenter, the way you prioritize your eye contact is going to be different. Okay, I'll give you an analogy here. Let's say that you're educating people, okay, like in this webinar. There's no one that's really more important than someone else, because the goal is simply to educate the group on how to master public speaking, right? Simple. So in this situation, everyone is a spectator. But what if I changed the goal? What if we were a marketing agency and we want to sell our marketing services to Coca-Cola? Right? So we're a marketing agency. We want to sell our services to Coca-Cola. We want to do the Super Bowl ads. We want to do their commercials. So naturally we're getting our team together. We walk into a room and we're up against 5 other agencies. In the same way at a law firm, a company is going to consider 5 different law firms and then pick the one that they want to work with. Right? So what is going to make the difference between us and everyone else? From a presentation standpoint, I would actually argue it's how you prioritize your eye contact. So let's imagine ourselves in that boardroom, okay? We're trying to sell to Coca-Cola, marketing agency example. And in that boardroom, there's going to be different types of people. There's going to be the CEO of the company, maybe, John Quincy. There's going to be a marketing officer, directors. And then there's Joe, who started last week. I mean, Joe's great, and we love Joe, and Joe's someone we need to look at. But chances are, Joe doesn't play a role in whether or not we win the contract, because he started at Coca-Cola last week. So even if Joe is someone we need to, pay attention to, we need to pay a bit more attention to the key decision makers of the room who fulfill the goal. So in other words, depending on what the goal of the presentation is, to win business, right, as an example, that we want to focus on the prize, on the people who make the decision on whether or not we get the client. This is mostly done through one-on-one interaction, but you get the idea. I'll give another easy example with law that I like. Moot courts. So when you do different courtroom systems, sometimes, and you're in a competition with people, there's judges, right, who kind of determine who wins and who loses, right? And that was true in business competitions when I used to compete. So in my specific case, I know that the exact format of a moot court works, but you can get the idea here. The goal was to win the case competition. The goal was to win the business competition. It wasn't to have fun, right? So in that situation, let's say you got judges and then you have the audience members all around in that room. My question is, who do you think I focus on, right? Think about that. Sure, I'm going to look at my audience a bit, but when I'm selling the dream, when I'm selling the vision, when I'm saying good afternoon to the board of directors, who do you think I'm looking at? I'm looking at the judges directly in the eyes. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm building a rapport with them. And every other team who isn't focused on that is looking at their audience the entire time. They're not focused on the goal of their presentation. This is very advanced, but I think it could add a little more layer, especially in your work presentations if you do a lot of sales calls and stuff like that. But obviously, I'm sure you're tired at this point because I've given you so many tips that you're like, whoa, what is this guy gonna add? So I'll give you 3 tips that apply for any space, any size, and any sort of prioritization. Another thing I'll add before I give the tips is, like I mentioned, if you master silences and ums and ahs only, you're already in the top 10%. This is just bonus that I'm giving you in case there was more advanced speakers in the room. So number 1 is prioritize to maximize. Prioritize to maximize. Prioritize your eye contact to maximize the impact of your presentation. If you're someone who's doing a sales call with a bunch of executives, you want to prioritize your eye contact. If you're educating a new team of associates, you're not prioritizing your eye contact. Everyone has equal power in the room. Number 2, Never ever deviate your eye contact from either your audience or your slides. Notice how in this entire webinar, I've only looked at the lens or the camera, the lens or the slides, I mean. I've looked nowhere else. If I looked here, 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 or here, I don't seem credible as a speaker. So be careful with that. And number 3 is always shift your body to every audience group at least once. So I'll give you a super easy example to demonstrate this. The tricky thing with public speaking that I know is odd is for some reason when we speak to 100 people, all 100 people are looking at us and we don't understand why. Why is everyone looking at me? Right? We don't really know. So to avoid that, because I know a lot of you are scared to look at people in the eye, and I was there, 100%. I struggled with that. So this tip is mostly for you. So normally what I do at the beginning is if we take that boardroom over there in the left corner, the wooden table, we'll use that as an example. Let's say let's imagine ourselves sitting in that boardroom together and I was presenting. So let's say I had 10 minutes to present. I keep it really simple. So I would do 2 minutes in the front and I wouldn't look at anybody. Just in the center, good afternoon to the board of directors. 2 minutes on the left, right? 2 minutes on the right. Once again, not looking at anyone in particular. I'm just looking at the group. So a group doesn't feel disconnected from me. And then at the end, I go back to the center. Thank you so much for the presentation, all that stuff, right? And I conclude. This will help you avoid looking at people in the eyes. But, and of course, is a huge but, as you get better as a speaker, as you start to master silences, ums and ahs and everything, then I'll challenge you to look at people individually in the eye. All right, let's end with a quick, easy one to finish, and then we'll wrap up. All right, this one's a fun one, so don't worry. It's nothing too technical. I want you to imagine your mornings. Okay, you wake up, you tell yourself, "Man, today is a great day. I got a lot of work meetings. I get to meet my friends today, my family. I get to have dinner with my loved ones. Life is amazing. I love my life." So when you wake up in the morning and you look in that mirror in the bathroom, you see someone who's really excited, who has a lot of energy, who's positive, and that is the energy that you will project onto your audiences, your loved ones, and everyone else around you. But the opposite is also true. This day sucks. I got a bunch of meetings today. I got to see this Indian guy present on public speaking. I got to have dinner with my family. This day is terrible. So when you look at yourself in the bathroom, in the mirror, you see someone who's negative. And that is the energy that you project onto your loved ones, onto everyone else around you, and more importantly, to your audience. So what does this mean for us? It means, and the punchline I'm driving, is that as speakers, as people presenting a topic and educating others, we are mirrors. And more specifically, we are the mirrors that reflect our own emotions to the audiences that we present to. In the same way that the conductor of an orchestra leads the orchestra to success, in the same way that a teacher leads its students, as a speaker, what we dictate, what we choose to feel is how our audience will feel. I've been locked in my house for the past 8 weeks. So clearly, I'm not super excited to be indoors, but I'm choosing to show up. I'm choosing the emotion. Because if I was angry, pissed, bored, you would wonder why. Why is Brenden so bored? Why is he so mundane? I guess this presentation is going to be mundane. But if I'm excited, if I'm calm, and more importantly, if I talk in a way that's very reassuring, you're not going to think that you're going to be a good speaker anymore. You're going to believe it. So my question is, which emotions will you choose? The next time you give a presentation, whether it's indoors, and I know it's difficult with online because there's nobody to present to, right? I'm literally alone in my basement, but I'm choosing to show up anyways. So what will you do? Will you choose boredom like most speakers? I'm not in the mood. Or are you going to choose calmness, excitement, reassurance? And that choice, my friends, is entirely yours. Let's recap. A lot of people ask me for book recommendations on public speaking and communication. And my book recommendations are very different than most. So I recommend you guys check out Thirst by Scott Harrison. So Scott is probably, in my opinion, the best storyteller in the world, because my point of view on storytelling is never listen to someone who gives you a framework, listen to someone who applies storytelling in their day-to-day. Scott has raised over $300 million for the charity that he has, Charity Water, and all of it's mostly been due to storytelling, the art of storytelling. That video on YouTube over there, The Spring by Charity Water, 20% of the people who watch that video convert to monthly givers of the charity, which is unheard of in the sector. But in relation to public speaking, Scott is probably one of the greatest minds on philanthropy and branding. And I actually use every single one of his insights in a lot of my story branding workshops that I give to companies across the world. So definitely check out the book. And obviously, if you don't like me, don't worry. Listen to Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Brene Brown, and Ariana Huffington, who all endorse the book. All right, let's recap. Silences. We learned that exceptional presenters use silences as a tool in their toolbox to make themselves exceptional. So don't be afraid of the pause, but rather see it as a leverage to make yourself better than everyone else around you. Ums and ahs. We know they're pesky. We know they're terrible words. We know they ruin our vocabulary. But if we get rid of them, if we start to gain more responsibility in the way that we control silences, in the way that we weave them, and our ums and ahs disappear, then we'll be in the top 5 to 10% of all speakers. So definitely work on that. What are you going to do with the future strangers you will present to? Remember that public speaking is easy when you're presenting to people you already know. The real challenge is, how do you present to people that you don't know, and how do you get them to fall in love with you and your ideas regardless? Eye contact. Eye contact, despite how tricky it is, if you use it correctly, if you weave it in appropriately, you can use your eyes in a way to drive your audience towards the emotion and the rapport you want to build with them. And with mirrors, don't forget that mirrors aren't just the thing you look at the bathroom in the morning. They are the very projection that you give onto your life, not just the people around you, but the audiences that I hope you'll serve in your life. If there's anything I want you to take away from this webinar, it's the following. Public speaking is not something you're born with. I guarantee you I wasn't. I was a kid growing up in Montreal who didn't know a word of French, who panicked every single time I went to a presentation. So if I can do it, I guarantee you can. So you can go from this, to presenting in any room, whether that room is a boardroom, a courtroom, or maybe even a karaoke room. Thank you so much, everyone. And feel free to also check out my YouTube channel, as this is a very small percentage of the tips that I like to give. And if you have any questions after this webinar that I can't answer, message me on Instagram. I'm happy to connect. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Brenden. I think I am personally mesmerized. It was so engaging. I loved your energy, your presentation, your tips. Obviously, being president, I see the difference between my speeches, my very first one that I did in public, after having some coaches such as yourself able to help me and then practice mastering the silence, which isn't easy, I have to say. It was very awkward to have to pause randomly, but practice does eventually make better. I'm not going to say perfect, but make better. So I'm glad that you're sharing all of the work that you do behind the scenes, and you know, so letting people know that it's not just you coming on naturally. I think that that's something that our members are happy to hear, and to know that they are able to you know, perfect themselves public speaking. We do have a few questions that are already in the Q&A section. I know that time has already a few minutes passed, so I'll keep it short and sweet. But if there are any other questions, please you know, let us know. We'll forward them to Brenden or put you in touch. So one of the questions that we have is, how do you know when to take a pause and where?
Yeah, so that's a simple one. So the answer is, there is no answer. There's no silver bullet to figuring out when to pause, where to pause, how to pause. So instead, what I would say is, present the way as you normally would. right? You know, let's say you're giving a easy example. Let's say you're giving a presentation in a boardroom at work. And then the second time, have a friend or a partner just watch it and help and give them the decision and let them decide when they want you to pause and then review the videos together. So the short answer is there's no real golden rule here. What I like to do in general, but it's not an ultimatum by any means, so it doesn't apply all the time, is I always like to pause in between big points. So let's say when I say a courtroom or even a karaoke room, notice how I pause in between of those rooms. But so that's an example, but there's no clear cut answer, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I know when I was practicing public speaking, and I have a long way to go, I think my coach made me pause at every 5 words, which was very awkward in the middle of sentences, didn't even make sense. Sometimes I was especially in French, in the middle of an ainsi, and then the next part I started que, which doesn't flow naturally, but I do know that it helped me make those unnatural moments seem more natural when it is in a more natural context. So, and I do think that pausing at those key points is a very good trick. Another question that we have, and I know that is probably what I did at the beginning of the presentation was when you're stressed and in front of a crowd and in public, and you just want to get out of there. You don't even want to be there, so you're just rambling through your speech, and definitely no pauses. You're not even breathing.
100%.
How do you go through that and going from so stressed to now taking a mindful 5 second, 20-second pause even?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to that, and I cover a lot of that in my videos. But the short answer here that I would say is presentations is a mindset game. Okay, and I'll dive into what that means exactly in more concrete terms. So let's give a quick analogy here. So let's say you're given a presentation, and 20 minutes before the presentation, okay, the CEO comes up to you and he says, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, Brenden, but half the room only speaks French, so you actually have to present in both languages together. Can you do that for me?" When you ask an average presenter, okay, what happens if you don't do well? Most people they would reply with, "Well, it doesn't matter. It wasn't my fault anyways. They didn't tell me ahead of time. This sucks." When you ask an exceptional presenter, what we always ask ourselves is the following question: what happens if I fail? What happens if I don't do a good job? And the shift in the mindset goes from this isn't my responsibility, there are 1,000 things going wrong with this presentation, to how do I make this my responsibility, and better, how do I care so much about my audience that my fear gets crushed? So that example that I gave you is the same situation I was in. But this time, it wasn't to a board of directors. It was to a group of 16-year-olds. And for me, failing was not an option because they spent the last 2 days building these cool projects that they think is going to change the world, but they all believe that they're not good speakers. So if I come up there and I don't speak well, what happens? I'll reinforce the belief. They'll say, "Oh yeah, Brenden sucks. So like, obviously we can't speak." And that belief system will last throughout their whole life. So my response is, I can't fail. It's impossible to fail because if I do, I'm going to let down 120 kids. So I think the way that you get over fear in general is you really need to care so much about your audience that your fear gets crushed. Because remember, your presentations is always about the other person. Like for me, it's not easy because I present every day, by the way. Like it's easy. It's hard for me to pull energy when there's no energy, but you do it because you want to serve the audience. So even if you're giving a boring presentation, there's at work or something, there's always an incentive for you to do well. Okay, there's always an incentive. And if you can give me specific on what the presentation is, I can give you more feedback there, but that's my general 2 cents.
Great, thanks.
For sure.
I'll ask a few more. I have personal questions, but I'll go with the public
Yeah,
one
yeah. I
first.
got 10, 15 minutes, so I'm good.
So now there's a question. Given how different it is between in-person presentation versus online presentation, what would be the main point of focus for a speaker to watch for, and how do you maintain their attention? I would really love to know, how you were able to like captivate our attention at the end of a work day at home where, COVID dying to go out. It's sunny outside. I have to say, and I think from a lot of the comments I'm seeing, people were just mesmerized, as I mentioned before. So how do you translate? How are you able to ooze that?
For sure. There's a lot of nuances there, but let me give you some easy ones for your audience to digest. That's super easy. One is always keep your eye on the lens. Okay. That's super easy, right? Notice how it's awkward for me to just keep looking at my lens, but I know if I don't, I don't look like I'm talking to you directly. So that's a super easy one. Second one is you have to always realize that in-person presentations are much easier than online ones. Because online, you don't have, it's just a reality we have to face. We don't have the same level of accountability. So let's say, Cindy, you're presenting to all of your partners right at the law firm in the morning and in the boardroom. You're like, okay, let me wake up at 5 a.m. Let me get ready, especially if it's your like first, right? You have to get ready. You know, my speech coach just gave me some advice. Like it's time to get, but if you're doing that same partner meeting, it's at 10 a.m. and you have to do it indoors, you might say, you know, especially if you're a guy like me, you're going to say, maybe I'll wake up at 9 a.m., put my PJs on and like, right? Like it's not the same accountability because you
Maybe
don't have
pants.
that stress. So, but one easy thing that we can do now is I want you to imagine one person in the audience that you know that is reacting to you. So I'll give you another transparent thing here. So I told a lot of jokes right in this presentation, and I don't know if people laughed, right? Like I can see now in your video that you're reacting, but
Yeah.
most of the presentations I give, I don't see anyone else on video. But at the end, they tell me I was funny or blah, blah, blah. But what's the point of that message? The point is you have to be so comfortable in your skin that you have to assume you're funny. You have to assume it's funny without seeing the reaction. I know it's tricky. So one way you do this is you have to visualize the one person in your audience and say, I'm there to serve them. So for me, since I only knew Cindy in the audience, even if it was just through webinar, I just went, okay, I'm presenting for Cindy. Cindy had a long day at work. I want to add value to Cindy, right? So because of that, I'm able to bring the energy, even if I did my same 9 to 5 as everyone else. And I also love it. So that's another thing. But I would say like that's the big ones. I hope that makes sense.
No, it definitely did. I have maybe one last question before
Yeah,
we take off. How do you captivate, your audience? I know webinar you mentioned a little bit, but like in person, like let's say that 10,000 person crowd at a conference. Obviously, not everyone is going to be listening. Some people are probably going to be on their
100%.
cell phone, maybe watching your Instagram stories instead of listening to me speak.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So how do you captivate everyone's attention?
Yeah, and honestly, I won't give you some BS like silver bullet answer because there isn't any. But the big one that I will tell you that most speakers don't do is that repetition is truly excellence. Okay. When I presented this deck the first time, it was rubbish. Okay. I didn't have these nice pictures, you know, that was like all like in this like cool box that would like move around. Like it wasn't like that. But when you present the same thing again, 175 times, you get a bit better at it, right? So my advice to anyone who wants to captivate an audience is if you are not willing, this is super advanced though, okay, but I'm just answering because we're having fun here, is if you are not willing to present the same thing 100 times, you will never be able to captivate your audience. I fundamentally believe that. If you are not willing to present, I present this thing every day, like the same thing every day, because I'm so passionate about communication. So one thing you can do, okay, to make this easy is, let's say you take, okay, Cindy, you might love your law job, but I think what passions you also is your role at YCPA, right? That's something that you love, or the philanthropic causes. So maybe you're giving a presentation about your favorite charity to the board of directors and say, we need to support this cause. That's something you're passionate about. So it's much easier for you to draw energy for those types of presentations. So what I would do if I was you and you were practicing, I wouldn't focus my attention on work related stuff unless you're really in love with law, but like, you know, like, okay, but like, let's, right, like I would say this is the topic that I want to get better at, this is the topic I'm going to do repeatedly, and this is also a topic that I'm really passionate about. So for me, it's communication. For others, it could be charity and stuff like that. So do that and be willing to do the same thing 100 times, and if you aren't, it's going to be very difficult for you to captivate an audience, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good advice. I think that people don't know how much work goes in for a few minutes speech, even in preparation, making sure you have all your key points. And, you know, I know from my personal experience by giving presentations or speeches at the Orchid Ball, the first one where I was terrified versus the last one where I felt much more comfortable, had practice, did my pauses, you know, and there's a lot of practice that goes on. And I know a few of the board members are here that have heard me speak many times and repeat the speeches a few times before I go on live. So I think that that's a very good advice to give for our audience. And I think we'll end on that. So thank you again for your brilliant presentation and for answering our questions. A special thank you I want to say for our leadership committee who has put this, reached out to Brenden and put this webinar series together during COVID. I would also like to thank our media sponsor, Ming Chen Hui, for promoting this event amongst the Chinese and Asian community. This presentation, like I mentioned at the beginning, will be available for replay and will be sent to you via email so you could review all the tips and tricks that Brenden gave us today. YCPA will continue to host various events online during COVID-19, so please follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter so that you will be tuned for our next webinar. Our next one is actually happening next Monday, May 25th, and it will be presented by Sonia Wu. So thank you all for participating. Thank you, Brenden, once again. Take care, be safe, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, everyone.